Welcome back to Footy Classified as we have a bit of a deep dive into the state of the game that we love so much. Phil Davis was an 18-game player with the Adelaide Crows before going to GWS to be their inaugural captain of the Frontier team. Took them to a grand final, almost a premiership, took them to a grand final, and has an MBA, has a Bachelor of Commerce at Sydney University and spent the last 12 months travelling the world and is one of the deep thinkers in our game of football. Paul Marsh started off at the Cricket Association, now has been a long-term head of the AFL Players Association and has hammered out the collective bargaining agreement in recent times. Gentlemen, welcome aboard. Sam, thank you for staying. We're going to throw this open and have a discussion about some of the big issues in football. First of all, to Paul and to Phil, the big story we've been talking about in the last break is player movement. Everyone wants player movement. We want to have unrestricted trades and restricted trading and all that sort of stuff happening around the place. But now we're just seeing players almost walking out the door at will. What's your position on that?
Maybe I'll start. I think from the AFLPA's perspective, we believe in the sanctity of the contract. So players and clubs sign contracts. We believe in that. But we also believe that if both parties decide that they want to go in a different direction, that can happen. I think that's typically how it's played out. And I think we make a lot of this issue when really it's a few players a year, and most of the times what ends up happening is the two parties end up reaching an agreement that they're happy with. And I think, we'll see that happen again in this trade period for sure. How
do you think Melbourne will be today when Keziah Pickett comes in? He's just been rubbed out. The club's thrown everything at it to get him off. They've got turmoil all around him with Petrarca, and he walks in and says, I want to go to Adelaide. He's got a contract, signed in good faith. Do the clubs need to have a situation where they can actually start getting rid of players who they might want to get out or change their list as they need be? Does there need to be a little bit more quid pro quo? Has the balance gone too far to the players?
I don't think it has at all, and I think we've seen lots of examples where clubs have effectively moved players on in contract. We don't have to go back too far for Treloar and Grundy at Collingwood, where that's exactly what happens. So I think, again, to make the point, like Melbourne in the example you've just given can turn around and say, we're not trading him. And he has no recourse over that. But if they can do a deal to move him to another club where they benefit from it, why wouldn't they?
Phil, you've lived this. What was it like going into Adelaide after 18 games and saying, I'm going to GWS?
Yeah, well, I think for me, the difficulty of actually moving club is still there, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges players face. And I think we all get scared that players just stand up and leave, but the ties that you get in football clubs are so hard, and players are still find it very, very difficult to move. And part of it is change of circumstance, and some of these times we've talked about, the Neil Bullen one, for example, that's family, and he decides he wants to move. And if things do actually change, then I think players are entitled to ask the question. But in terms of power, I've always felt as a player that I knew that I was contracted, and no matter if I had to, I could always fulfil it. But you always reason to ask. But the situation where you deliberately try to antagonise a situation to get out is probably something that we're seeing a bit more of.
Sam, your view on this, and it might be hard for you given the relationships you've clearly got of a positive nature with your players at the moment, but should there be a scenario whereby the clubs also can have control to move a contracted player, given that it seems to have gone so far the one way that players can just ask to move under contract?
I mean, I'm not the expert. I'll leave that with these guys here, but I think my job as the coach is to try to create an environment that limits people wanting to leave. And so I'm very focused on making sure the environment I have is one where everyone can thrive and everyone can have their opportunity to play at their best. Now that is not practical because every week there's 20 players who are disappointed with selection. So it's always a challenge, but that is what you're trying to create to avoid that exact situation.
So Sam, how would it impact list management decisions? Of course, you're getting involved in that, but if you've got, just using Christian for an example, probably the last couple of drafts you haven't taken a mid-forward because you think, oh, we've got Christian for the next 5 or 6 years. So when a player comes in and throws all those list management and you move money around, how does that impact the club?
Well, I mean, I think, as these guys suggested, he is contracted, so the club has the say at the end. But I think he could get injured at any point. Any player could do that. So I think when you're summing up your list, I rely heavily on our list management crew, who they make sure that when we lost Mitch Lewis this year, huge blow for us. We also lost James Blank, so we lose 2 of our really key players for the majority of the season, our full forward and our full back, basically. But we know that we have contingencies in place, and maybe a guy like Kel Shadir gets an opportunity that he might not have otherwise. So you have to have those things in place from a list management point of view.
Tom Barrass of the West Coast Eagles had this to say when he signed a long-term contract only recently.
it happens every year, and it's hardly a story. AFL clubs chasing established key position player. It's just the currency of football. Mate, I'm a West Coast Eagles player, and unless the rug gets pulled out from under my feet, I'll stay that way. And I'm really excited about what we're doing here.
And we've seen there, of course, that Tom has now asked for a trade to your team, Sam, at Hawthorn. And in that situation, it's hard because it's very easy to go back and retrospectively look at a press conference that happened 2 years ago when it's all full of vim and vigour. I understand a player's situation if the circumstances completely change. So, for example, I've got a contract here at Channel 9, but if Channel 9 suddenly became a completely different organisation and were doing things against my beliefs, I'd probably want to leave too. Is that the sort of maturity we've got to get into these type of things and work through? Tom, I'm not sure why he's leaving the West Coast Eagles, but he might just say, right, OK, they've got a long time to rebuild and there's a chance to go to Hawthorn where they're a club on the rise. That could well be his situation. The original point, though, Paul, can I ask you, do we need to get a level of maturity into our game that possibly is in America more than it is here at the moment?
Well, I think it is reasonably mature. I think, I'm probably just going to say the same thing over and over again.
Or is it just the media who blow the things up because it's good stories? I
think there's a bit of that for sure. I mean, I think Tom's situation's clearly changed. It looks like from the outside, West Coast are going to benefit from that trade at a time where they probably need to. So if it's a win-win, then I don't necessarily think we should be having a big issue with it. But again, West Coast could stop this from happening if they want to.
Have you worked out what you will have to give up to officially transact on that?
No, I have very little or nothing to do with that side of things. I think I don't know what the power imbalance is and those things. It's not really my area of expertise. But what I know as the coach or part of list management is that you need to try to create an environment that people want to come to and that people want to stay at. Now, that hasn't always worked for every club, and it certainly hasn't always worked for us. We've had players who have wanted to leave. We've had players who have wanted to come to us. And that's part of the evolution of the rolling of the ladder that should happen. And hopefully we can continue to benefit from whatever the rules that these guys bring in are.
Phil, you suffered serious injury. How hard is it for a player in that situation when you can't go forward and play football and you've got all the other issues? Players come back after a week sometimes with injuries that would put most people off their job for 12 months. How do you feel about Christian Petrarca, for example? Do you see similarities or do you have empathy for him?
No, I definitely have empathy for him in a lot of senses. I remember when I think it was about a decade ago, I was ICU 8 days, hospital for another week. But what happens is you try to keep information so tight. A lot of my teammates didn't even know how sick I was, how unwell I was. And part of that is, one, to protect me, but it was also protect the information, the IP of the footy club. And with that can create tension when not everyone knows what's going on, because one thing about football clubs, and it's paramount what's built on, is that everyone's in this together, and to have outliers is always something that can create tension. And that's why in my situation, I remember early in my days, my housemate was the only one that knew how unwell I was. But the thing was, no one else did. And they're like, well, where is Phil? What's he doing? What's he doing? And you need to be able to break those barriers down, because it's very much one in, all in, and there's no special treatment, because that's how you beat a culture. And I think in this situation, I'm not sure exactly what's happened, but it sounds as though there's definitely been a breakdown in communication so the players understand what Christian's going through.
OK, guys, let's pivot. Paul, I'll come back to you on this. We've spoken, you've been very strong on a number of issues in relation to illicit drug policy and the need to update it. And I think you've shown great leadership in that situation, and not to become hysterical about the whole situation. The first show we did this year, we said this will be the #1 story of the year, and it has turned out to be. Whether it's behind the scenes, bubbling along underneath the surfaces with a lot of the issues that are happening at clubs between professional players and those who are less so. At a time now where you get paid to be a professional footballer, do we need to actually look at this to take it into real professionalism? Because being paid might make you a professional, doesn't make you a professional player. What do we need to do? We said this round one that we need to get to a situation where possibly we do in-competition testing for illicit drugs all through the season as a way to protect players, not only from getting onto drugs, but also from the nefarious activities of underworld and gambling and all these other things. What's your thoughts? Where are we on this situation?
So we've been reviewing the policy with the AFL for more than 12 months. We're actually waiting for the AFL at the moment to give us a draft of what they want it to look like. from our perspective, the fundamentals of the policy have stood up. That doesn't mean we can't improve it, and we're talking about that at the moment. But this is at its core a medical model where we are trying to identify players that might be having issues, help them. And that's the real beauty of the policy, is players coming out the other side and actually having been helped by the game. Let's not forget this is a voluntary policy that the players put themselves up for, and most workplaces don't have this. So where we are focused at the moment and where we think there can be some change, some improvements, is just around the behavioural change piece. That's what it's about. It's identify and then change behaviour, and we are talking about how that might be updated. So some of that stuff, maybe not so much, but certainly on the front of behavioural change.
Well, with using concussion as an example, we've said, right, that's a medical issue. We have to get behavioural changes. So anyone who gets anywhere near a head clash now, bang, 3 weeks. Why are we so reluctant to tell players that if you want to take drugs in society, you can go and do that. But if you want to be a professional footballer, get an average pay of $500,000 a year, you can't take illicit drugs and threaten to blow the whole competition as well as your own life up. Why don't we just take that extra step to help the players? It's not punitive. It's actually a way of saving players from a lot of troubles, and it's getting worse, and we all know it.
I mean, I think it is punitive. Absolutely, it's punitive. You're trying to rub them out for 3 weeks and publicly then name and shame them, and that's...
Well, it's not compulsory to take them, so if you take them, you run the risk.
Yeah, but as I said, we don't have workplaces around the country where this is...
But this is professional
No,
sport.
but I think that's the problem with these sorts of
But you do have
arguments.
workplaces. You can't be a fly-in, fly-out mine worker. You can't pilot an aeroplane. I've got my contract says I can't. If I get done for drugs, I'm sacked on the spot.
Do you get drug tested in this work environment?
Happy to do so.
Yeah, but you don't. And I think that's...
Yeah, but I would do
that's
so.
what you're asking here of the players is above and beyond what we would ask of a normal employer in most workplaces.
But they're not a normal employee. They're getting $500,000.
Well, I think that's where I think we've got to actually take a step back here. And why are they treated as though they're to be held to a high standard?
Because they get paid a lot of money on commercial activities to be role models or to be celebrities in the communities. It's the same situation as being a television presenter.
Can I ask it this way, Paul? Do you think we've got an issue with illicit drugs at the moment that needs further addressing than currently?
I think we have an issue with illicit drugs in our community, and our players are part of that, and absolutely this is on the rise, and that's why we're reviewing it. But that doesn't mean we have to put measures in place that puts players, like the players won't sign up to this if it's so draconian. And where does this end, Ed? Do we get to a point where we look at every issue and go, we're going to ban the players from doing that and we're going to rub them out for 3 weeks?
You started to touch on it there. What solutions can you see coming down the pipe in the short term where we get to a level of, call it, middle ground between the fan, the competition, the Players Association and the players? Is there some solutions that are ready available?
Yeah, I think, so I think we're doing a good job of identifying. Where I think the work still needs to be done is in the behavioural change piece. And we are having some genuine success in some cases and in others not. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. And that's the discussion, and you'll hear more about it in coming weeks.
Fair enough. Phil, you've been around the place. I mean, yeah, we know drugs are there, and we know that players have got to let their hair down, etc., etc. What's your view on this? Because I'm seeing it that it's tearing clubs apart now. I'm seeing that there is, behaviour activity that is less than professional, and it's manifesting itself on the ground. And I'm seeing more and more a change in my time. Remembering I was, involved in doing the Underbelly series, so I know a bit about what goes on around these things. I've never seen the underworld become more volatile than it is now, and drugs is the gateway to get involved in the underworld. That's my fear. The doctors can look after their health benefits. I see something far more nefarious and volatile coming our way unless we do something. I'm worried about it.
Yeah, I obviously don't have the insight to the underbelly world, but what I would say is that from my point of view, I've seen both ends of it, of no, they can't play whatsoever, but I've also seen what football can do to change someone's life. And I think I've heard enough stories around this competition where if we had a punitive medal where people were rubbed out and it was public, the impact on their life would be too much to bear. And I think from my point of view, to protect and help someone in that point of view, to maybe have a couple of people misuse the policy is something that I'd be willing to accept. But if we can improve education and reduce that number that don't actually have a problem, because when I go out and I see the world, people between the ages of 18 and 40 50, 60 these days. It's everywhere. But we are different, we are role models. However, there is an element there where we need to be supportive because it is a problem and we're trying to help. And mental health is such a big part of it that we need to be careful of that.
Your point's very valid. I mean, the biggest age group of adoption of ice is 40 plus. So it's not just young kids we're talking about, but what I'm saying is it's now starting to rip at the fabric. Sam, can I get your thoughts on it? As a coach, would you like to actually have a little bit more visibility on what's going on around you?
It's much more visible in all of your worlds than in mine, I would say. I don't have exposure to this almost at all or at all. The thing I would say, and I'm not an expert in this area, the only thing that I would say that's important that as they continue to look to improve the policy is every club has a bit of a different structure. And I think the most important thing is the information gets to the right people. So when there's errors made or whatever, making sure the right person has the information. Now, so for some clubs, that'll be the coach. For some, it'll be the doctor. For some, it'll be the player development person. I think the right person who's the supportive, welfare-backed, and can actually incite change in that athlete, they're the ones who need to have the information. And I don't know how you would make papers to make that happen because it's a bit of a different structure at every club. But that's the part that needs to be, that's vital in my view.
Paul, as you said, you've been working on this for 12 months. AFL can change a rule from Monday to Tuesday, so I don't know why it takes so long. But if there's one thing that you would love to see come into this, what would it be? Because I'm asking this because you genuinely are concerned. You've got a really good view of the whole world on this. What's the one thing you would love the AFL to come out and say, we're going to introduce this as far as the drug policy is concerned?
Yeah, it's what I've already said. I mean, I think we need to take a more sophisticated look at how we change behaviours. And it actually doesn't just apply to illicit drugs. I think we've had some other really complex issues we've dealt with. And our model is inconsistent at the moment across the competition. So how do we actually take a best practice model to, starting to work with the players to solve some really complex issues? And so that's not easy, but that's the goal that we're setting ourselves.
By the way, if you can solve the drug problem, you'll win the United Nations award as well. I mean, everyone understands. Anyone who's a parent understands this and are so heavily involved in it. And so many people, they jump around on these issues because it is such a prevalent issue in our society. So thank you for being so honest and candid with us because we're all trying to get to the same result on this, and that is to give people the best possible opportunities. Welcome back to Footy Classified. Phil Davis and Paul Marsh have come back into the chairs to talk about things. Paul, can I ask you, when you look at Cody Waitman doing that, and these things happen all over the football world, and we get head up sometimes about drugs and these type of things, it must be gratifying to know that there are just such wonderful young people coming through, men and women, playing our game and giving to society the way they do. As I said, we can concentrate on the negatives, but there's so much upside, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, and there's a lot more out there, but in both programs. And I think credit to you guys for shining a light on the work Cody's doing. It's probably not enough of that happening in the footy media at the moment. So that was a great story. Thanks, mate. Phil, we're going to talk about concussion. First of all, clearly we need to try and stop concussion in the game. What is the balance? Do we need to actually head to rules where we actually just have stand-up tackling? Do we rip the Band-Aid off and just say, right, OK, we have to change our game because concussion is something that is just, we have to stop it. What's your thoughts on it as a guy who played hard and knowing what injuries can do to a player and what we've seen in recent times? What's the answer? It's a tough one. I think about my career a fair bit. I think I had 10 surgeries and multiple shoulders, a couple of knees. And I'm not worried about any of that as I get older. I'm only worried about one thing, and that's the 3 concussions that I had. That's the only thing that I look long term and think to myself, I hope I'm going to be okay, because we just don't know. And this is where I think concussion is such a difficult topic because, for example, CTE cannot be diagnosed until you're dead, post-mortem. So, and what are the markers? We think we know the markers, but that's very challenging. And that's why the ambiguity for me as a player is probably something that I hid behind, and you sort of go the odds, and you hear about all the stories that we do here, and you say, I hope I'm the majority that I'm not hearing about, and that's the scariest thing. And I think changing the game, and it's something that I think about a fair bit because I love the Guernsey, like the Giants Guernsey means a lot, but there's going to be another number 1 soon, but the player that was wearing it at that time has to live with the consequences of what he's done in that Guernsey, and that could be concussion, and that's where I see a discussion to be had about rules and safety for players. So further to that point, and I'll direct this to you, Paul, players have frustration, of course, being suspended for tackles and rules being changed. Do you feel the playing cohort and the Players Association
are brought along well enough with the AFL and the journey for what the game wants to be in 5-10 years?
I think we're involved, but probably around the edges. And, you know, there's other issues to talk about around the laws of the game and MRO and all those sorts of things. I think concussion is something that we are in the middle of with the AFL, and we deal with this on the current player front, but also what we're seeing coming through the past players. And, you know, there's issues, as Phil's talked about, that can't be reversed there. So I think this is something I think the whole industry needs to get together. We're talking about, you know, your question, Ed, about potential changes to the rules. Like, that's a big discussion, and it's a discussion I think we should have. Yeah. But I think we need to have it, you know, looking at this from 360 degrees, because there's a lot of unintended consequences when you start making changes. I think the game has evolved in a more positive direction in this space, but it still has a bit of a way to go. So I think, Jimmy, yeah, I think we could be more involved with the clubs and all the stakeholders.
Well, with just to that point, rather than have class actions coming and all that confrontational situation, there has been discussion over the years about having a no-fault liability pool of money for players, because the game is big enough and everyone who's involved in football loves the players. We want the players to be looked after, and we don't want to be litigating against each other and wasting money on lawyers and that type of thing. What's the best position for you? Where, if you could wave the magic wand tomorrow and say, right, here's what we need to do, what's your three-point plan to sorting out players who might be facing brain-related injuries?
Yeah, one of the outcomes of the CBA we negotiated last year was a pretty significant fund. So we've got about $60 million over the term of this deal that we are still working through with the AFL as to what this looks like. So I'd probably, you know, those discussions are really well advanced, but we haven't landed yet on what it's going to look like. But there will be a scheme there for players, past players who've suffered. We already have a number of things in place for players who may have their careers ended through concussion, medical support, all that sort of stuff. So it's adding on to what we've got, but hopefully we'll land something pretty soon on this.
Have you seen a big increase of past players taking that hardship fund in recent times and in the last few years, of course, with concussion and other serious injuries like Phil had suffered throughout his career? Has there been a big uptake on the hardship fund?
Yeah, there has, and I think I might even split this into two. The career-ending injuries, the percentage of those that are now concussion is much higher than what it used to be. So players coming out of the game, and then past players coming to us, there's a pretty high percentage now that are concussion-related.
Can I just say, I've seen firsthand a number of players who've quietly gone to the Players Association and been looked after beautifully, and nothing said of it. And it's a credit to you that you've kept the anonymity and not gone for the PR, and it makes a big difference to a lot of past players. Damien.
Yeah, Paul, is there a way that the game can be seen to be taking it seriously? And I know it is, but I'm saying that in the backdrop of the legal actions that are coming and are already in front of us, by way of the suspensions of players who tackle players and concuss. Can we let that player who does the tackle play the next week and yet still send a message that this is not part of the game? Or have we just gone too far beyond that? Do we have to suspend every time there is a concussion in a tackle?
It's a great question. I mean, this is an area of great frustration for the players.
It is.
I don't think they understand anymore, you know, what they have to do.
Yeah.
And
we changed the rules week to week within this season, back in the bye period.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the players. As you guys know, I've just had 3 months away from this job, and one of the great things for me was an ability just to look at the industry from the outside, and there's so much frustration out there about you know, and I don't want to blame the umpires, but the rules are so complicated and there is so much ambiguity and interpretation that we're getting to this point where the players, the people that are on the field putting on the show, don't know what's going on, and it's not good enough. So I think,
do you know why Lockie Ash got suspended a week 2 weeks ago and Liam Jones didn't?
I couldn't tell you, and it's, you know, I think the AFL need to probably answer this, but, you know, I've got friends who are umpires and they're also confused by this. So I think they're being put in a really difficult position, and this is something I think, again, to my point, I think we should bring the industry together and look at solutions.
Totally agree, and I think part of it is there's two players involved in a tackle. I mean, you can get rid of the ball and protect yourself, and I think that's one of the things we have to get back to is the players' first instinct is to protect themselves. Phil, you almost said before that you'd been thinking about some of the rule changes. I'll give you the magic one now. What are some of the changes that you would make? And do we, I mean, when I say this, people think that this is having a go, but do we go more to an international rules Gaelic football style of game that is high intensity, high velocity, but less head contact?
Yeah, I think, I probably haven't spent enough time on it. I think the fabric of the game is very important. We are an entertainment industry. We want to put on the best sport, and if we keep that for longer, the better. The thing that I think about probably the most, and I probably haven't done all the science behind it, but I'm a big believer in decreasing interchange. I think the players have never been fitter, stronger and faster in my whole life, so collisions are bigger and more powerful. And part of me thinks that the slower we can go, the smaller the impact could be. That could potentially help too. I'm sure that's a flawed argument, someone will tell me later on. But I think there is something, because when I started my career, I was in the top third runners. By the time I finished, I was right at the back.
Can I put this to you then, that do we maybe take 3 players off the ground, have 2 forwards, do it in the shape of the ground so that it opens up rather than all the congestion that we have? Do we get rid of a forward pocket, and a ruck rover maybe, and just have 15 players on the ground who get natural attrition and tiredness, and you can still have the interchange?
Yeah, well, I think there's a part of it that numbers on the ground will do a lot of interesting things, and that's a discussion forward. And I think the hardest thing is that we'll always have a counter-argument. We can say, let's do this, but there'll be a position that fans or HQ will say, no, that doesn't work, or clubs will say that doesn't work. But what I will say is, and what's happening at the moment is, players want to win and clubs want to win so bad. So one, concussion can sometimes players will avoid declaring it because they want to win.
So you don't think their attitude has changed enough?
I think it's definitely changed. What I think I've seen more now than ever is a senior player going to another player and saying, just go get yourself checked out. I don't think I ever saw that. I was saying earlier, 10 games after I debuted was the Jordan Lewis incident, and where the game is now to that situation, we've improved so much. But players want to win so bad that when you're going to ground, and like you were saying, they will fling because they know that's a chance to get a free kick. And we've got to somehow protect the players from manipulating the rules to put themselves in more danger. There was a period in time where I learned that if I drove my legs for an extra step, I could get a high tackle. But I'm just, once again, creating a situation where I'm putting myself and my head at risk more often.
Yeah, it's a vexed question because it does go to the combat nature of the game. And I suppose, Paul, that's where I'm, in our early discussion with the drugs, I go, yeah, we have to protect the head, but also, mind-altering drugs is something we need to protect your head from as well, and particularly if you're getting hit in the head at the same time, if you know what I mean. So they're vexed questions. Guys, it's been a pleasure to have you on tonight, Paul. And can you tell me just quickly, personally, you stepped out of the game for a little while. You did the collective bargaining agreement. How important was for you, and would you recommend this to coaches in particular, to take a break? I know over the years I've tried to get coaches to take breaks, and they just wouldn't do it because they had to be seen to be there first, last, harder, stronger, pushing all the time. Do we need to just calm down a little bit and, as you say, get back to this being a game again, but a professional one that is show business and big money, but it doesn't make any difference. You've still got to get yourself right to be able to do it. Yeah,
well, I can only speak positively about it. And look, basically, and Phil was part of our board when this decision was made. They forced me to take a break. I didn't necessarily want to take this long a break, but geez, I'm glad I did. 3 months, I feel refreshed. We've had as an industry, when you think about what we've been through, COVID, the 2 competitions running at once, and this is a 24/7 industry. Like, people in positions in this industry do never get away and therefore never get a chance to actually refresh. But also, I found the value of being able to look at the industry from the outside for a period was incredibly valuable for me in terms of what comes next. So, yeah, I would highly recommend it.
Good on you, mate. Thanks for coming in tonight. Phil, good luck. I hope we see you a lot more in football.
Thank you very much.
Good on you. Phil Davis giving us an insight, and Paul Marsh from the Players Association.